What made Queen Elizabeth II's life so extraordinary, beyond the tiaras and royal waves? How did her unique privileges set her apart not just from ordinary citizens, but from anyone else in the world? From driving without a license to personally appointing prime ministers, Queen Elizabeth II enjoyed a life filled with rare and fascinating powers. These privileges weren't just ceremonial, they were steeped in centuries of tradition and highlighted her symbolic role as the head of state. Have you ever wondered why she didn't need a passport or how she could dissolve Parliament with a simple proclamation? And what about her ownership of swans and dolphins? Let's uncover 20 of the most unique and extraordinary things only Queen Elizabeth II could do. 1. Driving without a license or plates. Despite being the head of a nation bound by laws and regulations, Queen Elizabeth II enjoyed a freedom most of us can only dream of. She could drive without a license or registration plates. In fact, she was the only person in the United Kingdom who didn't require them. This exemption wasn't simply a perk. It had a legal basis rooted in her role as a sovereign. All driving licenses and registrations in the UK were issued in her name, making it redundant for her to obtain one. However, her driving wasn't a mere indulgence. It reflected her dedication to service. During World War II, then Princess Elizabeth joined the Women's Auxiliary Territorial Service, where she trained as a mechanic and driver. She didn't just drive, she learned to maintain vehicles, mastering tasks like changing spark plugs and fixing engines. Even after ascending the throne, her love for driving endured. She was often seen behind the wheel, chauffeuring guests at her private estates. These moments not only highlighted her practical skills, but also offered glimpses of her personal side, far removed from the formalities of royal duties. When she drove, her car was instantly recognizable, not by its design, but by the absence of license plates. This small detail, though seemingly trivial, was a powerful symbol of her unique status as the sovereign. 2. Speed limits didn't apply to her. If driving without a license or plates seemed extraordinary, Queen Elizabeth II's driving privileges didn't end there. Speed limits also didn't apply to her. As the sovereign, she enjoyed exemptions from the usual rules of the road, including the legal speed restrictions that everyone else had to follow. This privilege wasn't just about convenience. It reflected her position as a monarch. Emergency services like police and ambulance vehicles are often exempt from speed limits to ensure they can respond promptly to critical situations. Similarly, the Queen's ability to travel unrestricted underscored her unique role, particularly during official engagements. However, it's worth noting that the Queen rarely exploited this freedom. Known for her composed and measured demeanor, she wasn't one to zoom through the streets recklessly. Even when she wasn't behind the wheel, her official vehicles, often driven by royal chauffeurs or security, were subject to the same exemption when transporting her for royal duties. This freedom mirrored a broader principle. The laws of the land applied to her in theory, but rarely in practice. It wasn't about breaking rules, but about representing her symbolic position above them. Yet this privilege also came with great responsibility. Every aspect of her travel was meticulously planned, ensuring safety and propriety at every turn. With such an extraordinary exemption, her driving privileges highlight just how unique her legal status was. But her immunity from road rules was just one aspect of a broader legal freedom. She was also untouchable in a court of law. 3. She couldn't be arrested or tried. While most of us navigate life with the possibility of legal consequences, Queen Elizabeth II lived with a rare privilege. She could not be arrested or prosecuted under British law. This principle, known as sovereign immunity, ensured that the monarch was above the law, both in the United Kingdom and abroad. The roots of this privilege lay in the concept that the monarch embodies the state itself. Since the law is carried out in her name, it would be contradictory for her to be subject to it. This immunity extended beyond criminal law, shielding her from civil suits as well. For example, if a legal dispute arose involving the crown, the case would target the government or her ministers, not the Queen personally. Her immunity wasn't confined to British borders. As a head of state, she also enjoyed diplomatic immunity when traveling internationally, meaning she couldn't be detained or prosecuted in foreign countries. While this might seem like unchecked power, it was balanced by her unwavering adherence to duty and tradition. Queen Elizabeth II was renowned for her integrity, and no scandal or controversy ever suggested she might have abused this privilege. Her immunity also highlighted the ceremonial nature of her reign. While the power of governance rested with elected officials, her symbolic position required protection from legal entanglements that could undermine the monarchy's stability. From the road to the courtroom, her unique legal status underscored a life unlike any other. Next, we'll explore how this extended to a surprising exemption from another civic duty: jury service. 4. Exempt from jury duty. For most people, receiving a jury duty summons is an unavoidable civic responsibility. But for Queen Elizabeth II, this obligation didn't exist. She was exempt from serving on a jury, a privilege tied to her unique role as the reigning monarch. While this exemption might seem like an indulgence, it was deeply rooted in the practicalities of governance and her symbolic position as the head of state. The reasoning behind this privilege was simple. The Queen's presence in a courtroom could disrupt proceedings, overshadowing the case itself. Imagine a trial where the jurors, lawyers, and even the accused might be distracted by the monarch sitting among them. Furthermore, her impartiality as a juror could be called into question, given her role as the sovereign under whose name justice was carried out. This exemption extended to the Queen's immediate family until 2003, when laws changed to include royals, except the sovereign. Despite this, the Queen never distanced herself from the justice system. Her speeches often underscored the importance of fairness and the rule of law. While she never sat on a jury, her symbolic role in justice remained significant. Every legal document bore her name, and her royal assent was required to enact laws. This privilege, like many others, highlighted how her life was intertwined with the workings of the state. But even as she stood apart in legal matters, her responsibilities extended far beyond the courtroom, into the realm of global travel, where her status granted her unparalleled freedoms. 5. No passport required for travel. For most of us, traveling internationally requires careful preparation, including a valid passport. Queen Elizabeth II, however, never needed one. This privilege was rooted in practicality and tradition. All UK passports were issued in her name, so it would have been redundant for her to carry one herself. This exemption extended beyond British borders, allowing her to travel anywhere in the world without the need for identification. While this might sound glamorous, it wasn't without its complexities. Every royal visit required meticulous planning, with the Queen's identity and security pre-established long before her arrival. Her movements abroad were carefully orchestrated, from greeting heads of state to attending ceremonial events. Interestingly, this privilege was exclusive to her. Other members of the royal family, including her children and grandchildren, needed passports for international travel. Despite this, the Queen's journeys were never anonymous. Her presence was a global event, often marked by grand receptions, media coverage, and significant diplomatic implications. Her freedom from carrying a passport symbolized more than just practicality. It underscored her role as a sovereign, transcending the rules that governed ordinary citizens. It also served as a reminder of the monarchy's historical ties to international diplomacy, with the Queen often acting as a bridge between nations. From her exemption in courtrooms to her unique travel freedoms, Queen Elizabeth II's privileges reflected the extraordinary nature of her life. But her distinctions didn't stop there. They extended even to taxation, where she enjoyed another notable exception. 6. Tax-free, by right but paid voluntarily. Queen Elizabeth II stood apart not only in her legal freedoms but also in matters of taxation. Legally, she was exempt from paying income tax and capital gains tax, a privilege granted to her as the sovereign. However, this exemption wasn't a matter of personal indulgence. It stemmed from the monarchy's unique position in the constitutional framework of the United Kingdom. Despite being legally exempt, the Queen voluntarily chose to pay taxes on her personal income beginning in 1993. This decision followed public scrutiny in the early 1990s over the royal family's finances, especially after a devastating fire at Windsor Castle and subsequent debates about public funding for its restoration. Her gesture was seen as a move to modernize the monarchy and align it more closely with public sentiment. Her voluntary payments included taxes on income generated by the Duchy of Lancaster, a private estate that served as her primary source of personal revenue. However, her sovereign grant, which funded her official duties, remained tax-exempt as it was financed by the state. This balance of legal exemption and voluntary contribution highlighted her understanding of her symbolic role. By paying taxes, the Queen demonstrated a sense of solidarity with her people, reinforcing the monarchy's relevance in modern times. Yet, this privilege also underscored the fine line the monarchy walked between tradition and public accountability. As with many of her exemptions, it reflected a delicate interplay between privilege and responsibility, much like her role in shaping government itself. 7. Summoning and appointing prime ministers. Among Queen Elizabeth II's most important constitutional duties was her role in appointing and summoning prime ministers. While these actions were largely ceremonial in the modern era, they symbolized the monarchy's central place in the UK's political system. Each new prime minister was formally invited by the Queen to form a government. This moment, known as the kissing of hands ceremony, wasn't just a formality. It signified the seamless transition of power in a constitutional monarchy. The Queen's presence lent legitimacy to the incoming leader, reinforcing the government's authority in the eyes of the public. Her role didn't end there. Weekly meetings between the Queen and the Prime Minister were a long-standing tradition, where the monarch was kept informed about the government's work. While she remained politically neutral, these sessions allowed her to offer counsel and continuity, informed by her vast experience with over a dozen prime ministers during her reign. Notably, her first Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, shared a warm and respectful relationship with her, setting the tone for future interactions. Decades later, her meeting with Liz Truss in 2022, just 2 days before her passing, marked a poignant conclusion to her extraordinary role in governance. Through these interactions, the Queen maintained a steady, symbolic presence at the heart of British politics. Her relationship with successive leaders reflected the monarchy's enduring adaptability, bridging tradition and modern governance. From guiding new governments to overseeing political transitions, her influence was woven into the fabric of the nation's leadership. 8. Dissolving Parliament and calling elections. One of Queen Elizabeth II's most symbolic constitutional powers was the ability to dissolve Parliament and call for new elections. While this authority became largely ceremonial in modern times, it remained a critical reminder of the monarchy's historical role in governance. The power to dissolve Parliament dates back centuries when monarchs exercised direct control over legislative bodies. By the time of Elizabeth II's reign, it had evolved into a formalized process guided by convention and the advice of the Prime Minister. For instance, when a government lost its majority, or a Prime Minister called for an election, the Queen would approve the dissolution of Parliament. The process was marked by tradition. When Parliament was dissolved, the Queen's proclamation signified the official end of its current session, paving the way for the next general election. Although her role was largely symbolic, it underscored her position as the custodian of constitutional continuity. One of the most famous historical examples of a monarch dissolving Parliament came before her reign when King William IV dismissed Parliament in 1830. While such dramatic interventions had faded into history by Elizabeth's time, her ability to dissolve Parliament still held symbolic weight. This privilege not only reflected the enduring legacy of the Crown, but also served as a reminder of its ability to act as a stabilizing force during political transitions. Yet, while Parliament's fate lay in her hands in theory, her influence also extended to matters of global diplomacy, particularly in declaring war or peace. 9. Declaring war and peace. Among Queen Elizabeth II's ceremonial powers was her unique ability to declare war and peace, a privilege steeped in the history of monarchy. This authority symbolized her position as the sovereign and head of the armed forces, even though its practical application had long been transferred to the government. In the modern era, this power was exercised on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. For example, declarations of war during her reign, such as Britain's involvement in the Falklands War, 1982, or the Gulf War, 1991, were made in her name but decided by elected leaders. Yet her role in such matters was far from passive. As the figurehead of the nation, her support for troops and her presence during times of conflict reinforced national unity. The Queen's connection to the military was deeply personal. She had served as a young princess during World War II, driving and maintaining vehicles as part of the Women's Auxiliary Territorial Service. This experience shaped her lifelong dedication to the armed forces. She frequently visited military bases, attended remembrance ceremonies, and honored veterans, strengthening her bond with those who served. While she did not wield direct power in declaring war, her symbolic presence during times of conflict was invaluable. Her authority to declare peace further reflected her role as a unifying figure, bridging the ceremonial and constitutional aspects of the monarchy. From political transitions to military matters, her influence was a testament to the delicate balance between tradition and modernity. 10. Head of the Church of England. Queen Elizabeth II held the title of Supreme Governor of the Church of England, a role steeped in both history and tradition. This position, unique to the British monarch, originated during the reign of Henry VIII when the Church of England broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. As its head, the Queen symbolized the close relationship between the Crown and the Church, embodying spiritual guidance and moral authority. Her duties as head of the Church were largely symbolic but carried significant cultural weight. She formally appointed bishops and archbishops, although this was done on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Crown Appointments Commission. Her role as defender of the faith, included in her official title, underscored her responsibility to uphold and protect the Anglican faith. The Queen's personal faith was deeply ingrained in her public life. Her annual Christmas messages often reflected her Christian beliefs, offering comfort and hope during challenging times. These messages resonated with millions, showcasing her ability to connect spiritual values with contemporary issues. Her presence at key religious ceremonies, such as the annual Maundy Thursday service, further reinforced her role within the Church. At this event, she distributed Maundy money to pensioners, a gesture of humility and service. Through her role in the Church of England, the Queen not only upheld tradition, but also adapted to the evolving spiritual landscape of her nation. This blend of continuity and change extended to another of her symbolic duties, conferring honors and titles. 11. Conferring titles and honors. One of Queen Elizabeth II's most recognizable ceremonial roles was conferring honors and titles, a practice that celebrated achievement and service across British society. As monarch, she personally bestowed titles like knighthoods, damehoods, and other distinctions during the iconic investiture ceremonies at Buckingham Palace. The honors system recognized individuals who made significant contributions in fields such as the arts, science, business, and public service. While the selection process was overseen by government ministers and committees, the Queen's personal involvement gave the awards their gravitas. For the recipients, meeting the monarch and receiving a title was a moment of profound pride and national recognition. Her ceremonial duties extended to knighthood, a tradition dating back centuries. Modern-day knights didn't don suits of armor or wield swords in battle, but their contributions were no less significant. For instance, Sir Terry Pratchett, the acclaimed author, famously forged a sword from meteorite fragments after being knighted. Titles like Dame were equally significant, with notable figures like Dame Maggie Smith receiving the honor for contributions to acting. These ceremonies, rich with tradition, served as a reminder of the monarchy's role in celebrating and fostering national pride. Through the conferral of honors, the Queen maintained a vital connection with her people, recognizing their efforts and contributions to society. From spiritual leadership to recognizing excellence, these roles exemplified the enduring significance of the monarchy. Next, we'll explore her ceremonial duties within Parliament, where her influence was equally profound. 12. Ceremonial duties in Parliament. Among Queen Elizabeth II's most significant ceremonial roles was her duty to open Parliament. This annual event, known as the State Opening of Parliament, was a grand occasion that showcased the monarchy's enduring connection to the legislative body. While the Queen did not involve herself in the day-to-day politics of governance, her presence during this ceremony served as a reminder of the monarchy's symbolic role in the democratic process. The state opening was steeped in tradition. Wearing the imperial state crown and regal robes, the Queen would proceed to the House of Lords, accompanied by heralds, attendants, and members of the royal family. The ceremony began with the searching of the vaults, a custom dating back to the gunpowder plot of 1605, to ensure the safety of the sovereign. Once seated on the throne in the House of Lords, the Queen delivered the Queen's Speech, written by the government and outlining the legislative agenda for the coming session. Although she had no role in drafting the speech, her delivery lent it an air of authority and continuity. This ceremony symbolized the unity of the Crown, the Lords, and the Commons. The tradition of summoning the members of Parliament to the Lords' Chamber highlighted the interplay between the monarchy and elected representatives. Her presence at this event was a powerful emblem of stability, bridging centuries of history with the modern political era. Beyond Parliament, her ceremonial duties extended to other traditions, including her role in appointing bishops and shaping the spiritual leadership of the Church. 13. Appointing bishops and religious leadership. As the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, Queen Elizabeth II held the authority to appoint senior members of the clergy, including bishops and archbishops. While the process was largely procedural in modern times, it highlighted the unique relationship between the Crown and the Church. Appointments to key positions within the Church were guided by the Crown Appointments Commission, a group that provided the Prime Minister with recommendations. The Prime Minister, in turn, advised the Queen, who formally approved the appointments. Although her role in the process was largely ceremonial, it underscored the monarchy's historical role as the protector of the Anglican faith. The Queen's deep personal faith often guided her approach to this responsibility. She maintained a close relationship with many religious leaders, attending significant church events and fostering interfaith dialogue. Her speeches frequently emphasized the importance of faith as a source of strength and guidance, reflecting her belief in its unifying power. One notable example of her influence was her ability to adapt tradition to the modern world. By supporting diversity within the clergy and promoting inclusivity, she ensured that the Church of England remained relevant in an evolving society. Her role in shaping spiritual leadership was not just about upholding tradition, it was about preserving the moral and cultural fabric of the nation. As we move from her religious influence, we next explore the personal privileges she enjoyed, which were as fascinating as her official duties. 14. Exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. One of Queen Elizabeth II's more understated yet impactful privileges was her exemption from the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. While public institutions and officials are typically required to disclose certain documents and information under this legislation, the monarchy enjoys a unique level of privacy, ensuring the Queen's affairs remain confidential. This exemption applied not only to the Queen but to the entire royal household. It meant that details about her finances, correspondence, and even the extent of her influence on governmental matters were protected from public scrutiny. This level of confidentiality underscored the monarchy's distinct role in the UK's constitutional framework, separate from elected officials and insulated from the kind of transparency required of public bodies. The rationale for this privilege was both symbolic and practical. As a constitutional monarch, the Queen had to remain politically neutral, and exposing the intricate details of her engagements or correspondence could risk undermining this impartiality. Furthermore, the monarchy's historical traditions and relationship with the state were considered sensitive, requiring discretion to preserve its dignity and relevance. Critics of this exemption often argued that it limited accountability, particularly regarding the use of public funds allocated to the royal family. However, supporters pointed out that the Queen's voluntary tax payments and public engagements demonstrated her commitment to balancing tradition with modern expectations. This unique privilege of privacy wasn't merely about shielding her from scrutiny. It was a reflection of her role as a stabilizing, apolitical figure whose influence transcended ordinary governance. 15. Ownership of dolphins and swans. Among Queen Elizabeth II's more whimsical yet significant privileges was her ownership of certain wildlife in the United Kingdom. By law, she owned all unmarked mute swans in open water and a selection of aquatic creatures, including dolphins, sturgeons, and porpoises, within British territorial waters. This right, dating back to medieval times, was less about personal use and more about tradition and conservation. Her ownership of swans was particularly symbolic. Every year, the tradition of swan-upping, a centuries-old ceremonial practice, took place on the River Thames. During this event, the Queen's swan marker and teams from 2 livery companies would count and inspect the swans. This practice wasn't merely ceremonial. It contributed to the conservation and welfare of the species. Similarly, her claim over aquatic creatures, referred to as royal fish, stemmed from a law introduced during the reign of King Edward II. These creatures, when captured or washed ashore within 3 miles of the British coast, were considered property of the Crown. While this law was rarely invoked in modern times, it underscored the monarchy's historical connection to the natural world. These privileges reflected the Queen's role as a steward of the nation's heritage and environment. Far from being mere curiosities, they symbolize the continuity of royal traditions and their adaptation to modern conservation efforts. From wildlife ownership to personal jewelry, these privileges were a fascinating blend of history, symbolism, and modern relevance. 16. Private ATM and access to crown jewels. Queen Elizabeth II's life was steeped in privileges that underscored her exceptional status, and among the more intriguing was her access to a private ATM. Nestled within the confines of Buckingham Palace, this cash dispenser was installed by Coutts, the royal family's preferred bank. It was exclusively available to the Queen and other members of the royal household. While it's unlikely the Queen frequently used it, its existence symbolized the monarchy's unique lifestyle and resources. Her access to wealth extended far beyond a private ATM. The Queen also had unparalleled access to the crown jewels, a collection of some of the most valuable and historically significant treasures in the world. These jewels were not personally owned by her but held in trust for the nation. Items like the imperial state crown, the sovereign's orb, and the scepter with the cross were integral to state ceremonies, including her coronation and the state opening of Parliament. In addition to the crown jewels, the Queen had her own personal jewelry collection, which included iconic pieces like the diamond diadem. These jewels, often seen at formal events, reflected her impeccable taste and deep connection to the history of the monarchy. From financial resources to priceless treasures, these privileges were more than symbols of wealth. They represented the continuity of royal tradition. Yet, her role wasn't just about wealth or ceremony. It extended to her unique ability to pardon individuals, a power steeped in justice and mercy. 17. Granting royal pardons. One of the most significant and solemn powers Queen Elizabeth II held was her ability to grant royal pardons. Known as the royal prerogative of mercy, this authority allowed her to pardon individuals convicted of crimes, reduce sentences, or even expunge convictions altogether. While it was rarely exercised in modern times, it remained a powerful symbol of the monarchy's role in justice. Historically, royal pardons were used to prevent executions or offer clemency in exceptional cases. During her reign, the Queen exercised this power sparingly, and often with considerable public or political significance. One of the most notable examples was her posthumous pardon of Alan Turing in 2013. Turing, a brilliant mathematician and codebreaker during World War II, was convicted of gross indecency in 1952 for being gay, a conviction that led to his tragic death. The pardon was widely seen as a long overdue recognition of his immense contributions to the war effort and humanity. Another poignant example occurred when 2 inmates in Wales rescued a prison officer from a wild boar attack. Their bravery prompted the Queen to grant a reduction in their sentences, showcasing her ability to balance justice with compassion. The granting of royal pardons reflected the monarchy's unique position in the justice system, one that bridged tradition, mercy, and modern values. As we move forward, we'll explore another vital aspect of her sovereignty: her role in legitimizing laws through Royal Ascent. 18. Legitimizing laws through Royal Ascent. One of Queen Elizabeth II's most critical constitutional roles was granting royal assent to legislation. While this act was largely ceremonial during her reign, it remained a vital step in the legislative process, ensuring that a bill passed by Parliament became law. The tradition of royal assent dates back centuries, when monarchs held direct power over the laws of their realm. By the time of Queen Elizabeth II, this power had transformed into a formality. No bill passed by the Houses of Parliament could take effect without her signature, yet the Queen never refused assent during her 70-year reign. The last monarch to withhold assent was Queen Anne in 1708, when she vetoed a measure to establish a Scottish militia. The process of granting royal assent was deliberately symbolic. The Queen didn't personally sign every bill. Instead, it was done through letters patent or an official ceremony by her representatives. This practice maintained the balance of power between the Crown and Parliament, with the Queen acting as a stabilizing figure rather than an active policymaker. Royal assent was more than a procedural step. It embodied the unity of governance under the constitutional monarchy. While the Queen's role was non-political, her presence lent a sense of gravitas and continuity to the democratic process. This seamless interaction between tradition and modernity extended to her role as the head of the armed forces, where her responsibilities were as symbolic as they were profound. 19. Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. As Commander-in-Chief of the British Armed Forces, Queen Elizabeth II held a position of great significance. While the actual command of the military was exercised by government officials, her role as the figurehead of the armed forces symbolized unity, loyalty, and service. Every member of the British military swore an oath of allegiance to the Queen, reaffirming their dedication not only to the nation, but to the Crown. This symbolic act reflected the deep historical ties between the monarchy and the armed forces, a bond forged over centuries of conflict and service. Her connection to the military wasn't just ceremonial. As a young princess during World War II, Elizabeth joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, training as a driver and mechanic. This experience gave her a personal understanding of military life and a lifelong respect for those who served. Throughout her reign, she maintained close ties to the armed forces, frequently visiting military bases, attending commemorative events, and supporting veterans organizations. During her reign, the Queen's role as Commander-in-Chief extended beyond the UK. As the head of state for multiple Commonwealth countries, her position underscored the shared military history and alliances within the Commonwealth. This enduring relationship with the military highlighted her dedication to duty and her ability to represent the strength and stability of the nation. As we approach the final part of her extraordinary privileges, we turn to her role in dissolving Parliament, a power rarely exercised but steeped in constitutional significance. 20. The power to dissolve Parliament. One of Queen Elizabeth II's most symbolically significant powers was her ability to dissolve Parliament. While this authority was rarely used in modern times, it held deep constitutional importance, representing the monarchy's role as a cornerstone of the British political system. Dissolving Parliament officially marked the end of its current session and paved the way for a general election. This power, exercised on the advice of the Prime Minister, highlighted the collaboration between the Crown and the government. It ensured a smooth transition during political shifts, whether prompted by the loss of a parliamentary majority or the Prime Minister's request for a new mandate from the public. The process was deeply rooted in tradition. Once the Queen approved the dissolution, a royal proclamation was issued, formally ending the parliamentary session. This was followed by the election campaign, during which the monarch remained politically neutral, waiting for the results to appoint the new government. While the Queen's role in dissolving Parliament was ceremonial, it carried profound symbolic weight. It underscored the monarchy's role as a stabilizing force in times of political change. Historically, monarchs exercised this power more directly, but by Elizabeth's reign, it reflected the evolution of the constitutional monarchy, balancing tradition with democratic principles. Her ability to dissolve Parliament was a reminder of the enduring link between the monarchy and governance, an interplay that defined her reign. From her unique privileges to her unparalleled legacy, Queen Elizabeth II's life remains a testament to the enduring power of tradition in a modern world. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.